Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, or this evening, I should say. I'm really happy to have you here to get some tips and insight into developing a concept design portfolio. My name is Carla Gonzalez, and I am Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the College for Creative Studies. And I am going to be hosting you this evening with the information you are looking for. So I'm going to give it just another kind of half a minute or so before I get started. We do have a good number of people interested in joining us this evening. I also want to let you know I am recording this session. So we will make the recording available to you via email tomorrow. We'll send you a link for the recording if you want that for future reference. But we will also have it available on the CCS Admissions YouTube video library. We have a bunch of videos, lots of really helpful information there, whether it's about the application and admission process or recordings of our major insight events, which were happening all through the month of October, highlighting each of our different majors with faculty from each program participating in those. So if you have any interest in watching those, you can find those on YouTube at the CCS_admissions channel. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. And I am going to go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Carla Gonzalez, Director of Admissions for undergraduate programs at the College for Creative Studies. So I think really the key thing to know about concept design portfolios is that the strength of your portfolio really is only limited by your own imagination and the time commitment you make to developing the portfolio. So as you may be aware, if you have taken a look at our portfolio requirements, you will have seen that the concept design portfolio requirements are a bit more rigorous than our general portfolio requirements. And so we are looking for more pieces and work in your portfolio. We're looking for particular formatting and different form studies that you'll see in this presentation for all the elements of your portfolio. So I think what's really key here is to understand that the heart and inspiration of your work needs to be a story. So whether that's a story you have written yourself or a story that you are choosing because it's your favorite, or it's a story that you were inspired by, while you were reading it and it created visuals in your mind that you feel can be really strong and that you want to work on. So that story can be whatever you choose, but the idea is that you're building a portfolio to convey a story through visual terms and means. If you think about what a concept designer does, is they create entire worlds for stories that start on paper. And so as a concept designer, you're looking to create that world and all of the objects in it, including the spaces, places, people, things in it and around it. So you are building a world, and it's also important to think about storytelling as the heart of your portfolio. So how will you visually convey the 8 parts of your story? So when you talk about storytelling or story writing, there tend to be 8 elements that you need to consider. So they are setting, character, plot, conflict, theme, point of view, tone, and style. And I'll review each of these with examples so you can see a little bit more in depth about what we're asking you to do. So setting. Really, this is identifying where and when your story takes place, and then you're developing what that looks and feels like. There is no right or wrong answer to this. This is where you get to allow your imagination to soar, and you can choose whatever setting and that you wish for your story. So again, this is designing and developing the spaces and places that your characters will have adventures in or have experiences in. You want to convey to us how the setting will impact all the other elements of your story. So you are kind of setting the stage, if you will, for the rest of your story by choosing a setting. Characters. What we're looking for you to show us through your characters is the real essence of who they are. That means how they think, what they believe in, what they look like, how they make decisions, who they interact with, and how they interact with them. So typically we are not looking for just one single character, but often we're wanting to see your protagonist and the antagonist, or maybe there's a cluster of key characters within your story that you would highlight and work on so that we can better understand, again, how they interact with one another. So if you think about your, the good guy versus the bad guy, or the team of heroes, right? Whatever it is in terms of your story, we're looking for you to develop characters that are conveying personality. That we want to see how they emote or show their emotions, and whether that's anger or joy or frustration or can-do attitude, whatever it is, we want to be able to feel those kinds of things coming from the character. So this example drawing, I think, is really a nice way to show you what we mean, because if you look at the face of the character, it's not just a blank portrait. It's a portrait showing us determination, grit, confidence, all of those things that this character conveys. I can then carry into the story and understanding better how this character moves through and interacts with other characters in this story. The other thing to think about with characters, and you'll see as I continue through this presentation, that we do want to see how characters relate to one another, not just in terms of the storyline, but in terms of their shape and size. Are they, is it a 5-year-old child working with a 6'5" adult female, right? I don't know, right? But we do want to be able to see the relationships, the visual representations of those relationships in the characters that you're developing and how you're presenting them. So plot. I think it's really important to keep in mind that you are welcome and encouraged to include basics about the story you are trying to or are presenting visually. So you can include a story outline or synopsis. You can include context and background or the backstory. And you can set the stage for your portfolio by including snippets of the story that you're utilizing to create this world. You have to remember, again, that a concept designer is working from a written story. So if you're working with a director has a script, a director may have notes and ideas, and those are going to be shared with you. And then that's what you're going to build your visual information off of. So don't be afraid to include parts of that story as a way to inform us, the reviewers of the portfolio, about what you're trying to do. Conflict. Remember, conflict is really an essential part of a story. It helps move that story along from beginning to end. If you had no conflict or any, the story could be very boring, right? So conflict also allows us to become emotionally invested in the story because we may have chosen sides, we may have favorites. We can also use that conflict as a way, again, to show our characters interacting, showing power plays, showing roles, responsibilities, all of those key elements. So one of the things that we do recommend that you consider including is what we call keyframes. And this is a really good example of a keyframe of a key moment in the story. And in this case, this is a keyframe that highlights the conflict within the story. Now, notice also at the bottom of the image, there is some written language explaining what's happening in the story. And that is perfectly fine. If it allows you to draw us further in or better understand what's happening in this keyframe, I think that's really valuable, and don't shy away from doing that. Also, this is a nice example of point of view that I'll show you in the next, in another slide here. Theme. Theme really is using or developing, creating visual cues that carry throughout your portfolio that relate to the story. So it could be things like repeated motifs or designs. They are visual distinctions that support the storyline. So this is, I feel like, a really good example of that because it is a very uniform, consistent presentation of a theme that supports the story, right? So this file, case file, folder, the Manhattan Project, United States Army, it's got the emblem, it's got, you know, the look and feel of sort of a secretive case file. And then that graphic is carried through the various other images within the portfolio. So you'll notice in the leftmost upper image on this page, you can see that repeated file motif, but the file is open. So you are revealing what's inside another case file. And it's like we're looking inside this file, learning all of this secret information about the Manhattan Project. And then additionally, you'll notice that in the lower left image on this page, the theme of this sort of army, heavy metal, the colors are very consistent across the accessories or the hardware that are being designed for this story. So all of that unites or unifies the visual look and feel for the story and simply helps us make better connections and more sense of how all of this works together. Point of view is important. So when you are designing a keyframe or composing a keyframe, think about point of view and how point of view can help inform the viewer, us, about the key elements of a story and understanding the relationships between places or people, the significance of situations. Really, it helps us develop a deeper understanding of what is happening behind the scenes, if you will. And then it also conveys attitude and perspective. So this example is here because it's important to show that this building, whatever it is, even if I don't know exactly what it is showing me that from the angle I am looking up at this large, heavy structure, and so are many other people. And it puts that structure in a position of power over many people, not just one. So not just, let's say, the protagonist who is in the very forefront on the left, but also all of the other people in the presence of this building or object. So it's not just a one-on-one relationship that this building has in our story, but it is a one over many relationship that's being conveyed here. And this is really important to, again, help us better understand the story and the characters' roles within the story. And keep in mind that this structure can be a character, right? Because if it holds power or it has a personality or it rules over the land, then that is a character within the story. It doesn't have to be a human form or an animal form. It can be a structural form, right? So just keep those kinds of things in mind and make sure that you are, identifying those characters within the story in ways they're going to help, push that story forward. Also, take a little bit of a note here above the color drawing image here. There's the little panel of silhouettes. The silhouettes you'll see continuing through this presentation here are really actually pretty important for us to see as a way for us to better understand the shapes and ideas that you've worked through to get to the final design of this thing. So we call it part of ideation. So working through your various ideas, attempting some shapes, attempting some designs. And then as you work through your ideas, finalizing or coming to an agreement with yourself that you're going to develop one of these ideas because you feel it is visually stronger, it carries more weight at the top, whatever those decisions are, it allows us to see your pattern of thinking. And again, you'll notice the language from the story here at the top left. Tone. I think tone is really key here because, and it's also interesting because this is all work from the same portfolio. And I wanted you to take a look at this because you can approach some parts of your portfolio in really hyper detail, right? Maybe these are the parts of the portfolio that you really, really got into, that were really exciting and inspirational to you, and you just kind of like lost yourself in them, right? That's great. We would love to see that. But that doesn't mean that every single piece of your portfolio needs to be that hyper detailed. You can provide samples of your work that is more literal or suggestive. If in the upper right hand, or rather in the upper part of this slide, you have the black and white grayscale studies that are not as hyper detailed. They're a little bit more about showing the interplay of dark and light in a frame or a composition. They're not as detailed as these line drawings are, and that's fine because not every piece of your, your final is going to be a line drawing. We do want to see you working in a variety of media. If you have access and experience working digitally, we'd love to see that in addition to the handwork. So just keep in mind that the different presentation styles of your idea or tone, I should say, within your portfolio is fine. There is another example about style that we'll talk about too. So tone also refers to things like consistent color palettes and consistent texture palettes. So if you're thinking about how do all of these things work together in the same world, you want to make sure that there are some consistencies. Perhaps there are some intentional inconsistent items. And when do those happen? Why do they happen? Is there a rationale for why that happens? So keeping that in mind and planning ahead for those consistencies allow you to build a tone for the story that holds that story and gives it weight visually. So, and I like to show this example because this is essentially Beauty and the Beast positioned in the Wild West. So, it's a little bit different of an approach from, a medieval French story to an American Wild West story. And it's just a different take. And so this is a great example of using an existing story, but taking your visual idea of it way beyond something that you have seen before. Another good example of tone or something to consider when you're thinking about the tone of your portfolio and your work and your story is lighting. So making sure that your lighting is intentional, that lighting is definitely a consideration for the spaces that you are designing, the environments, the places, because again, lighting can convey emotion. It can help you feel. If you think about a movie, when the lighting changes within the film itself, that can cause you to feel different ways. Are you nervous? Are you excited? Or, is it a happy, shiny day, or is it a dim, dark night, right? Like all of those kinds of things come into play. And we want to see that you are considering those things and understanding, because if the story requires those shifts, that you are conveying those shifts and why and where and when they are happening within the story. Style. So style is important to provide consistency across the various elements of the story you are designing. As you saw with the Beauty and the Beast, the style was very consistent in terms of, having that story live and exist in a space. So your style that you pick should be relevant to the time, place, and space of the story that you choose. So, right, you don't have to place it in the actual time that the original story was written. You can place it 5,000 years in the future. You can place it yesterday. You can place it 500 years ago, right? It really is up to you. And the idea is that you choose that place, space, and time, and then you develop the content and the style to reflect that through your work. Another example of style, we don't have a preference for which style you choose. And so I want to make that very clear. That's up to you to choose a style for your story. But again, we are looking for some consistency in terms of how you are presenting this information. So I mentioned earlier the keyframe, which you would see here in the upper right. I also mentioned these ideation studies or silhouette studies. So on these bottommost images, you can see in the corners, there are silhouette studies of the various shapes for this vehicle that you considered, or the various shapes for this mechanical dragon lizard that you considered. And then what we want to see is that you've developed one of those into a final rendering where you're, pretty sure, like, this is what I think really works for this story. These are the colors. This is the texture for the material that I'm imagining. And then also showing us a little bit about how this character moves. So that's really a strong element to a portfolio as well. I mentioned with the characters, we don't want to see all of the characters just standing there face forward. Your characters move and they have a life in a story. So we'd like to see them, how they move. What do they look like when they're kneeling down or, jumping, or whatever it is that character does within a story. So are they always carrying a backpack? We want to see the backpack, but we don't always want to see it on their shoulder. We might want to see them looking through the backpack, or putting the backpack down, or packing the backpack, right? Like, what goes in the backpack? That's also really interesting. Like, is it food, or is it a flashlight, or is it, ammo and a weapon? I don't know, right? That's up to you. But those kinds of insights help us better understand that character. And so we encourage you to do those little deep dives on things that really kind of excite you, and then make sure that you're kind of giving us those insights about how things work or how things move. Also, you'll notice in the upper right-hand image, there's some color images. They're very small, which is fine on the page, but they are inspiration images. So we do like to see this as well. These are just a couple. It does not have to be a whole giant page. It doesn't need to be, overly done, but just a few examples of shapes or of objects or things, ideas that you are using to inform your own design for an item. You'll notice there are also inspiration images in the very lower left for the pizza deliverator's car on the lower left. So again, it's just 3 simple images, but it just kind of shows like, hey, these wheels are really cool. That's kind of what I'm pulling from this one image. And then I really like that narrow, low front. So I'm using that element of that vehicle design in mind, right? Like, so it's just taking those various elements and putting them together so we can kind of see what's, gotten you inspired for your design. Okay, so here are a few tips for preparing the actual presentation of your portfolio. We do encourage you to cluster your work into sections. We do require the portfolio to contain environments, characters, architecture, and hardware. And the hardware can include things like vehicles, accessories, props, weapons, etc. Okay, so you can have a section for each of these things, obviously multiple pages within each of these sections. We do want you to include, as I mentioned, inspiration images, silhouette studies, grayscale variations, final renderings, and keyframes of plot points. We do want you to include snippets of your story that support the visual choices you're making, as I've shown you, like just the literal written segments of your story or a very brief explanation of what's happening in the keyframe that you've included. We do want you to create as many pages as you require, but we don't want you to just throw in everything you've ever done, right? So we do want you to edit your work. We do want you to make purposeful choices about what you include, but we really don't have a maximum number of pages that you can submit. Now, the slide room application does require that you submit I believe it's between 5 and 15 files. That means that we do want you to break your presentation into sections, as I mentioned. And you can break those into 5 different sections. You can break them into more, but no more than, I think it's no more than 10. So keep in mind that multiple page PDFs are ideal for presentation. So even if you're making your files in Photoshop or, you're photographing drawings you've made, whatever it is, just convert them all to a PDF and then put them together as a multiple page PDF. Remember that when you're photographing work, or if you're saving Photoshop files, the files will tend to be very, very big. We need you to keep in mind that those resolutions can be challenging to upload. So we would like you to do your best to keep resolution in mind and bring your resolution down for on-screen viewing. So that typically means around, I would say no more than 150 DPI resolution, or I would say 9 by 11 or so. But and again, it's just for file size. So just keep that in mind. And if you're having trouble uploading your file to SlideRoom, it is likely because it is too large. Okay, so that's another reason to break your files up into multiple files so that they don't just get enormous. Okay. We also recommend that you use a horizontal layout. Everything I've shown you this evening is horizontal. Keep in mind, we're talking about movies, right? And the movie format is horizontal. So if you do horizontal layouts on 11 by 17 inches, that really works best. And that works fine for a PDF as well. So that's what we recommend. And think about laying out your 11 by 17 in a left to right kind of orientation, simply because we're storytelling, right? And that's typically how we understand images and information. Okay, so I am going to stop recording and I am going to open it up to questions so that we can, let me just stop the recording here.